Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessings of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, in a message to the troops before Normandy. This year marks the 80th anniversary of Operation Overlord, or D-Day. In addition to the outstanding example of providing clear leader's intent from General Eisenhower's statement that I just read, on today's episode, 5 Enduring Leadership Lessons from D-Day, I'll share how the leaders and planners of the world-changing event known as D-Day continues to provide modern-day leaders and planners with strong professional and personal examples of how to get shit done. But first, welcome to the Hope is Not a Plan podcast, where we address tough questions head-on, face our problems, and highlight our hopes by providing actionable planning steps to improve ourselves, mind, body, and spirit. Now, let's get logged in and get locked on to this episode of the Hope is Not a Plan podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to Hope is Not a Plan podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Pennell. I'm a people leader in the healthcare IT space with a background in military medicine, public safety, emergency, and program management. These opinions are my own, not those of my former or current employers. I appreciate you being here, for subscribing, sharing the show. Please leave a review on Apple or Spotify, and for visiting hopeisnotaplan.org. That's where you can find more episodes, resources, and as a way to reach out to me with your feedback or episode ideas. So now let's break down Operation Overlord and D-Day and those 5 leadership examples that I mentioned in the opening. So the breakdown, the problem, the hope, the plan, and the solution. So the problem was, which is a pretty big problem, Nazi Germany controlled much of Europe, right, including Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Poland, Holland. They were pushing through France. They were pushing forces to the English Channel. Not a good situation for the free world. The hope is somehow Allied forces, the good guys, could push back, regain freedom for the conquered countries, and then defeat the Nazi regime, right? They're out of here. The plan, lots of plans going on, but this one related to Operation Overlord, bring together a multinational force to repel and push back Nazi forces in and around Normandy, France, to establish a foothold, and then keep fighting, right? We're also fighting in Africa and other places, but here we're going to focus on the fight in Europe. The solution, ultimately, was mass the multinational forces, land on the beaches, jump into France, fight until victory was achieved. So, with the problem, the hope, and the plan and solution I just read in mind, let's jump into these takeaways that I gleaned, and the source I used was from, just history books I've read, but for this episode, Planning for D-Day, Preparing Operation Overlord, and it's from the National D-Day Museum, National World War II Museum, rather. And so I have links to this. I'll have it in the show notes and on the website. But reading through some folks you haven't heard of, and of course, General Eisenhower, who most people have. So let's jump into this, right? So these are lessons from United States Army General Ray Barker, British Army Major General John Sinclair, Lieutenant General F.E. Morgan, and then the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. So the first, Colonel Baker, was picked to, hey, take a look at this problem. Let's see how we can put this plan together. So the first leadership lesson to me is he was a colonel, Colonel Baker then he got promoted, identified and acted on the need for collaborative planning, right? I've talked about that recently, how to bust down those collaborative silos. So Colonel Ray Barker was from the U.S. Army Special Observations Group, and once he started diving into the problem of how to do something about the Nazis pushing our forces into the English Channel and how can we push back, realize I need to embed and be really close with the British folks and other forces, but primarily Sinclair, who was from the British Army, a Major General. And so I'm going to give professional and personal examples for each of these. So the professional example is for us as team members, as team leaders, as department leaders, whatever level, when we see an opportunity to improve a process or fill a gap, or we see, hey, we need to plan with those folks, because from what I see on my side, it's going to be a problem if they have their plan and other people have their plan and all these kinds, right? And so speak up and take action when you see that, right? And Barker just took action. He was like, I need to embed, we need to do collaborative planning. And as we'll see, it worked out well. Still an awful day, but Barker and Sinclair worked well together, and it was the foundation for what would be the actual invasion. Personally, how have you partnered at home, right, with your spouse, maybe on a project? Sometimes we can get disconnected from each other, but to me, Barker going, hey, I need to work better with this person, because if we don't, it's going to be a problem. Same thing happens at home, right? Say our spouse is the one that plans everything all the time. Take that off their hands once, right? If it's your relationship, but it's good to balance out who does what. dinner. It's a simple thing. Hey, I'll make dinner this tonight. Just a simple thing, but it's the same kind of thing. We see an opportunity. We need to collaborate. We need to get stuff done. The second example is, again, Barker and Sinclair, but they led up the chain of command because they were prompting leadership to make a decision, right? They had a plan. They were like, no, let's make another plan. Let's focus on this. They were getting all this different direction, and it was too much. And at some point, Barker and Sinclair said, hey, we can plan, but you got to tell us which one, or it's just going to be a disaster and nothing's going to happen, right? So this happens in the workforce, and we need to, as leaders and team members and whatever level we're at, is, to me, the professional example is be ready to objectively and honestly report the status of your work, because it cues up key decisions that you want your leaders to help with, right? It doesn't matter, actually, honestly, if you want them to or not, but if you want to get a decision, you need to have good data to support it, good information. And then sometimes they need to help you make the decision because maybe you're not seeing it. You're too close to it, and they have a more strategic view. And I think Sinclair and Barker were able to say, hey, let's take a look at whatever plan we're going to do and make a decision and head toward that way. And it helps provide clarity and direction. And so professionally, that's a good thing. At home, focus on your kids, right? Make them comfortable with giving you feedback, right? Because I said so is not a great answer all the time. Right? In the heat of the moment, if I said it, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes if it's a safety thing, there's less time to explain stuff. But largely, your kids need to know it's okay to give you feedback on how you're doing, how you're acting, how you're making them feel. That's the give and take of having kids. And I think that's a good example from Sinclair and Barker on how they did that. So we are doing collaborative planning, right? We are open. We're leading up. We're giving that feedback to help things go better for everyone. And in my third leadership lesson, I gleaned from this information, Lieutenant Morgan, General Morgan, who was a person that took on Barker and Sinclair. I'm sorry, I said Baker earlier, it's Barker. And Lieutenant General Morgan was chosen to take on this planning, chief of staff, right, for Eisenhower, to take over Operation Overlord. And he saw what Barker and Sinclair were doing. He's like, I want you on my team. So we recruited him, got him in there. And he established, which is great, and I mentioned this in a LinkedIn post recently, which I'll share, positive and negative variances. And I got this from a book called The Power of Moments, which is great. And it was a system essentially of giving effective systems and procedures for the team to follow, and did so by saying, we're going to have these processes and we're going to make these decisions, we're going to talk this way. But it wasn't micromanaging, which is different, right? And so the professional example of what General Morgan did for his folks as they planned for Operation Overlord is we can make templates. We can have best practices. Here's what we do. Here's what we've done. Here's what works well. We can train our teams on the process we want to use or sometimes have to use. But we also need to allow a little bit of room for innovation in their work. Here's the templates we use because the documentation has helped us look back on things, right? So there's a why in that template. But if you find at a different point you should use a kind of different document, that's okay. But is the substance there? Right? Do we know why we're doing the project? Do we know what the budget is? Do we know the key performance indicators we're trying to get to? That's the key, right? The key is, do we have the info? Does it have to be just like I do it? No. Does it have to be perfect like I would have done it? Not that I'm perfect, but we all have preferences. And personally, when I give my kids chores, I'm going to make it super clear, right? This is why you have to do them. This is why it matters that you invest in this house, not just me and your mom. But then also, okay, here's the things you have to do. Here's how to do them safely so you don't get hurt if they're cutting the grass or doing something like that. And then let them go do it, right? I might start with the center part of my yard and they start on the side part of my yard cutting grass, and who cares, right? You can throw some quality assurance in there, but in general, we've got to give our kids room. Just like Lieutenant General Morgan said, here's how we're going to do things. But then also, as you'll see in the next point, the fourth, he gave them room to give feedback and talk about it and determine and be creative. So it's a delicate balance, and there's no perfect way to do it. Just consciously think about that. Guardrails, positive and negative variances. And then also, Lieutenant General Morgan is establishing this new planning team, this new planning section for Operation Overlord. And he encouraged and expected and pushed his team for open and crucial conversations. He pulled everybody together, not just Barker and Sinclair, but other military leaders, and said, here's all the plans, let's hash it out. It was kind of what I've been part of called a murder board. You bring their plan there and you want people to pick it apart, and then you talk about it, and then you take it back, and it gets better each time with each iteration. Well, Lieutenant General Morgan fostered these open and crucial conversations. He allowed everybody an opportunity to sell their plan and discuss ideas. And that's awesome. And so when they got together later, they just picked up the conversation because they'd already talked about it. It wasn't a bunch of people in a room and mad and arms crossed and my plan and you spoke badly and blah, blah, blah. That's ego stuff, right? So my take professionally, it is very helpful to have regular one-on-one meetings with your team members and have open and crucial conversations. Sometimes you have to because the team member is not doing well and maybe they don't recognize it, or whatever, something's happening and you don't find that out until you set up a one-on-one and you throw it on the table. Hey, here are the issues I'm seeing. Here's how it's impacting the work. Here's how it's impacting, I believe, our relationship, your relationship with so-and-so, and you throw it out there and you talk about it. Or maybe you need a full team meeting and throw the cards on the table. Here's the sticking point with where we are in this project. How are we going to get through it? And if it's crickets, then we go back. Remember that coaching versus consulting. So I'm going to ask a question. If I hear crickets, I'm going to say, okay, well, does this approach seem good? And then we're going to talk through it, but we're not leaving until we've addressed the elephant in the room, as they say, right? It could be underperformance. It could be pending negative impacts, but at some point you have to have open and crucial conversations, and you gotta get your ego out of the way and understand that your plan's not perfect all the time, or that your plan's not perfect ever, really. And so personally, this can happen with hard conversations with your spouse, right? If you're not getting along well, if you're not connected, if you're just in a bad place in your relationship and you dance around what you want to say, but you don't want to say it because you're tired or frustrated or mad at the other person or think it won't help, I can tell you from having been there, it will help. You have to throw that on the table and openly discuss things with your spouse. Similar in a different vein, but with your kids. If there's a constant problem where you're having difficulty with your kids, you see they're upset, don't dismiss it and don't count on the electronic babysitter to take care of it. That is the internet and their smartphones, or you get on yours and just ignore it and keep going, because it won't go away and it could get real bad. So Lieutenant Morgan, foster those crucial conversations. At work, we should do that with our teams, one-on-one or with the team. And at home, we should welcome them. And if it's not happening, take the first step. It makes a huge difference. The last leadership lesson has to do with the quote I read, which to me is one of the most crystal clear examples of awesome leaders' intent. And that's from General Eisenhower, where he clearly said, it's not going to be easy. You're facing hard competition. And I believe in you. And we are getting victory. That's what I expect. So it's realistic. It lays out what we have to do, what we should plan for, what the objectives that we're going to do align with. An objective is we have to win. Not an objective, but it has to align with that, right? And so professionally, clearly lay out to your teams what you expect and why, right? It doesn't always have to be a two-way discussion. Sometimes you have to lay it out there. And then there can be room for the iteration and things we talked about. But it should be clear so they understand. And that helps them. It's not you dictating. It helps them not have to guess or wonder, how do I do this or how do I do that? And I've fallen short and learned, and man, I really should have given that feedback earlier. And I apologize I didn't. Thank you for letting me know. I apologize you didn't know that. Some people, if they're go-getters, find it on their own. But the leader's intent shouldn't be a mystery, right? And at work, on projects, at all. At home, kind of similar, like I mentioned about chores and things. So with our kids, we have to have boundaries and guardrails for what they do, period. But also understand it, right? You can't go to all these different sites. No, at 10 years old, you can't be on YouTube all day, or you can't play shooter games, or whatever you're comfortable with and your guardrail, just so they know. And here's why. You can find things that are upsetting. People can find you, like, they need to know the connection, but they need to also know, like, that it's just not going to happen. And it'll develop, of course, parents that are out there that have their kids that are getting older. Mine are 17, 13, and 11. So they've grown up more and they understand more, but it's hard to explain that to a younger kid, right, in detail, other than saying there's not everything you really want to see out there on the internet. So you get that point. But leaders' intent is crucial at home as much as it is in the office or virtual office these days. So I want to share, because the 80th anniversary again is coming up this week on June 6th, the aftermath of D-Day. Operation Overlord. So the D-Day operation of June 6, 1944 brought together the land, air, and sea forces of the Allied armies in what became known as the largest amphibious invasion in military history. The operation, given the codename Overlord, delivered 5 naval assault divisions to the beaches of Normandy, France. The beaches were given the codenames Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The invasion force included 7,000 ships and landing craft manned by over 195,000 Navy personnel, Navy, from 8 allied countries, almost 133,000 troops from the United States, the British Commonwealth, and their allies landed on D-Day. Casualties from these countries during the landing numbered 10,300. By June 30th, over 850,000 men, 148,000 vehicles, and 570,000 tons of supplies had landed on the Normandy shores. So think about the logistics, let alone the planning steps we talked about, the open conversation, the leader's intent that had to exist for all of that to happen, right? And this isn't a plan where we want a new device to be more efficient and save us money and time. This is a plan to send a bunch of people against bullets and bombs on a distant shore against an enemy that we know is ruthless. Without good leadership, without solid planning together, collaborating, leading up the chain, to be honest, establishing those positive and negative variances, having open and crucial conversations, none of that would have happened, or it would have been even worse than it was. So the call to action for us that I will remind myself and that I hope is helpful for you to think about is at work, evaluate how collaboratively you and your team are or are not planning with others. Be honest about it. Be on the lookout for opportunities and openings to provide constructive feedback up the chain of command. Not that you have to look for like the bosses to mess up or anything, but just being aware, like, oh wait, I should probably give feedback on this because they are saying something or they are planning towards something that I think I already know is not going to work out well from what I know about my project. Give those guidelines to your team, right? While allowing room for open discussion and innovation. That's at the project level, at the individual level. If you're a manager or a director, like on up the chain as you have more people, make sure people know what they should do and let them give you feedback and help you change it if it needs it. Check in with your teams regularly. Validate if they truly understand that leader's intent that we need to give. At home, things I've found helpful for sure after 23 years of marriage and 17 years as a parent, look at your home life and objectively evaluate how much effort you're putting into helping around the house. That's with your spouse and with your kids. And whatever flavor of life that means for you. Be humble enough to accept your kids leading up to you, providing you feedback. Right? It's very helpful. It's hard to accept sometimes because you're like, well, I'm an adult and the parent, but you know what? They know you the best of anyone. So that's some of the best feedback you're going to get. Help your kids understand the why, right? Again, because I said so, only lasts so long and it's not super duper. Behind the rules, right? Why do we have these rules? And then let them grow in completing the tasks and, safety aside and how exactly they do things. And then again, go deeper than how was your day when you talk to your spouse or your kids, right? Really dive in. How was that project that you mentioned the other day, right? Remember things, ask about things, dive into subjects, or just ask off the wall questions. Would you rather have cake or pie? Would you rather, all these things that are just not the typical passing by in the morning or the evening and then the next day and the next day. And it's easy to get stuck in that pattern. I know I've been there with my wife before, and it takes work, it takes planning and action to get past it. So in closing this episode that will have come out a few days before the 80th anniversary of Operation Overlord or D-Day, the brave men and women directly and indirectly involved in Operation Overlord saved countless lives. Imagine if they wouldn't have stopped the Nazi regime. Right? Even though we lost millions. The cost was tremendous though, right? During Operation Overlord from June 6th through August 30th, over 425,000 Allied and German troops were casualties, right? Nearly 37,000 died among the ground forces. The world can never truly repay this debt. To try, I believe that we as humans can take the hard-learned lesson from the leaders like Barker, Sinclair, Morgan, and Eisenhower and apply them to make our teams at work and our families at home better humans in the time we have here. Thank you all for listening to the Hope is Not a Plan podcast, for reaching out to me, for inspiring me by giving your reviews and emailing me. Remember, hopeisnotaplan.org for planning, fitness, and wellness resources. Thanks to those of you that have bought yourself some wellness resources, some Jocko Fuel products. They work. I use them. I take creatine, krill oil, the protein, joint warfare every day. And at 50, I'm stronger than I've been. And certainly I feel the recovery a bit. But those products, I truly believe in them, and I take them all the time. So Thank you for purchasing those, for getting the discount, supporting the show that way. Please stay safe out there. Remember the leadership lessons that Barker, Sinclair, Morgan, and Eisenhower have provided us, and Godspeed to you in leading yourself, leading your teams, and leading your families. Stay safe, everybody. See you next time.